Sarah and Daniel were once considered the picture-perfect couple. He was a successful entrepreneur with a growing tech empire, and she, a respected art curator with charm and intelligence. From the outside, their lives seemed flawless, a fairy tale marriage of wealth, success, and shared ambition. But as the saying goes, not everything that glitters is gold. Behind closed doors, cracks began to form. Daniel's constant focus on business began to overshadow their relationship, and Sarah found herself feeling increasingly isolated. Arguments became more frequent, and emotional distance widened the gap between them. Trust eroded slowly, painfully, until it shattered entirely when Sarah discovered something that would change her life forever. Late one night, Sarah accidentally stumbled upon a folder of emails on Daniel's laptop. What began as mild suspicion turned into a crushing realization. The messages revealed a romantic and emotional affair between Daniel and one of his business associates, someone Sarah had met several times at corporate events. The betrayal was devastating, but what made it worse was the calculated nature of the deception. The emails weren't just about love. They contained discussions of financial matters, including talks of asset movement and future plans that didn't involve Sarah. It was clear. Daniel had not only betrayed her emotionally, but he was also preparing to protect his assets in anticipation of a fallout. Heartbroken but determined, Sarah hired a skilled divorce attorney. When the legal proceedings began, it wasn't just about the end of a marriage. It was a battle for justice, for truth, and for reclaiming her voice in a relationship that had silenced her for too long. What Sarah didn't expect was the discovery of a secret clause buried deep within their prenuptial agreement, a clause that could leave her with almost nothing. Her attorney, Rachel, explained that the clause appeared to have been inserted quietly, without proper disclosure or explanation, and it effectively waived Sarah's right to any of Daniel's post-marital earnings or properties. The revelation turned what was already a painful divorce into a full-blown legal war. Sarah had signed the prenup in good faith, trusting Daniel completely, unaware that this document could one day strip her of what was rightfully hers. And so began the battle. In the opening days of the trial, the courtroom was a storm of tension. Media outlets swarmed the courthouse steps, drawn to the story of a high-profile couple, betrayal, and a controversial prenup. Social media buzzed with speculation and divided opinions. Rachel laid the foundation for Sarah's case, arguing that the prenup was invalid due to lack of informed consent and emotional coercion. Sarah testified that the document had been given to her just days before the wedding, and that she was pressured to sign it without legal counsel, under the threat of the wedding being called off. Meanwhile, Daniel's defense team claimed the document was perfectly legal, and that Sarah had ample time to review it. They portrayed Sarah as someone who changed her mind about the agreement after realizing the marriage was over. The courtroom drama began unfolding like a television series, each testimony, each piece of evidence adding a new twist to the narrative. But for Sarah, this wasn't entertainment. It was her life, her dignity, and her future. And as we continue this emotional and legal roller coaster, we invite you to stay with us. These stories aren't just about courtrooms and contracts. They're about people, pain, love, and resilience. If you're finding this story compelling, don't forget to subscribe to our channel for daily real-life legal dramas, emotional battles, and the verdicts that change lives. Your support helps us continue bringing you these powerful narratives. Now, let's dive deeper into the trial in the next chapter of this gripping case. The second week of the trial brought heightened drama. and a deeper unraveling of Daniel's intentions. Sarah's legal team had filed a motion to subpoena Daniel's financial advisor, hoping to uncover evidence that Daniel had been actively hiding assets. The courtroom was tense as the advisor took the stand, and what followed stunned everyone. Under oath, the advisor confirmed that Daniel had indeed created offshore accounts months before the divorce filing. The documents presented showed large sums being transferred discreetly, often masked through shell corporations and cryptocurrency transactions. The motive was clear. Daniel was preparing for this legal fallout far in advance, while still maintaining the appearance of a loving husband. The judge's expression hardened as the evidence was reviewed. Sarah sat in silence, her face a mix of heartbreak and vindication. The deception she had felt was now a matter of public record. Her attorney used the discovery to further undermine the legitimacy of the prenup, arguing that such dishonesty in finances went hand in hand with emotional manipulation. Meanwhile, Daniel's defense began to falter. Their cross-examinations became increasingly defensive, and their arguments about Sarah's intentions felt weak against the mounting evidence. Daniel himself looked more agitated in court, his confident demeanor slipping with each revelation. Then came one of the most emotional moments of the trial. Sarah was called back to the witness stand to describe the final months of her marriage. Her voice shook as she detailed the loneliness, the nights spent wondering why Daniel came home late, and the slow realization that their love had become a lie. She described how she discovered the emails and how her world crumbled. Her story wasn't just about betrayal, it was about emotional abandonment, the loss of self-worth, and the strength it took to confront a powerful man in court. The room was silent as she spoke. Even the judge paused before speaking, acknowledging the courage it took to face such trauma in public. In response, Daniel finally agreed to testify. His defense team hoped to regain control of the narrative, but what followed was more damage than repair. Daniel admitted to the affair and to creating separate accounts. He claimed it was a business decision, meant to protect his company from what he feared would be an unfair divorce settlement. But his words only deepened the impression of cold calculation. The court saw a man willing to erase a decade-long marriage for the sake of financial gain. Public opinion shifted heavily in Sarah's favor. Media coverage painted her as a woman fighting back against manipulation and legal trickery. The legal tides were turning. Rachel moved to challenge the prenup not just on ethical grounds, but also based on fraud and financial concealment. If the court found that Daniel had hidden assets and failed to fully disclose his financial position when the prenup was signed, the entire agreement could be thrown out. As the court prepared for the next phase of the trial, expert witnesses and forensic accountants, Sarah found herself at a crossroads. Win or lose, she had already reclaimed her power. The court had heard her story. The world was watching, and her voice could no longer be silenced. In the days that followed, new evidence continued to surface. An internal memo from Daniel's company hinted that even his business associates were aware of the offshore accounts. Emails discussed protecting Daniel's empire from entanglement, further proving the premeditation behind his actions. Sarah's legal team was elated. With every new document, the foundation of Daniel's defense weakened. The courtroom felt like a battlefield, but one where Sarah was finally gaining the upper hand. Rachel sat across from Sarah in their modest hotel meeting room, poring over every legal document, every email printout, and every thread of communication that could possibly prove the deceit that lay behind the seemingly perfect marriage. The more they examined, the more patterns of manipulation began to emerge. Daniel's legal team remained silent about the new findings. That silence was deafening. The court had granted an extension to examine the new evidence, and Rachel was determined to use every second wisely. One of the biggest breakthroughs came unexpectedly. A former junior accountant, who once worked at Daniel's firm, reached out anonymously. He claimed to have seen files related to offshore accounts, set up in dummy corporations' names, and tied back to Daniel through obscure financial maneuvers. The accountant, fearful of legal consequences but driven by guilt, agreed to testify if granted immunity. Rachel moved quickly. The witness was deposed, and their testimony was admitted into evidence. What followed was a media storm. Suddenly, this wasn't just about a marriage or a prenup. It was a story of corporate fraud, lies, and the misuse of marital contracts. Inside the courtroom, Rachel's questioning was surgical. "Mr. Halverson," she asked the former accountant, "can you explain how these offshore accounts were created?" "Yes," he responded confidently. "They were hidden using shell companies. Money was transferred out of the main accounts slowly over years, appearing as consultant fees or asset depreciation, then funneled into these hidden accounts. Daniel personally approved every transaction." The judge leaned forward. This wasn't just deception. It was deliberate fraud. Daniel's lawyers scrambled. They attempted to exclude the testimony, to question the credibility of the witness. But it was too late. The court had heard enough. Sarah, watching the proceedings, sat stunned but strong. Her faith in herself and in Rachel's ability had never been stronger. Every word the accountant spoke was like lifting a veil that had been covering the truth for years. Next came Rachel's presentation of digital records, encrypted messages recovered from a shared device, correspondence between Daniel and his financial team, all revealing discussions of ways to minimize exposure in case of a divorce. The final blow came when Rachel played a voicemail left by Daniel in a moment of arrogance to one of his advisors. "If she ever tries to walk, I've got the prenup. She'll get nothing. That's why I wrote it the way I did." The courtroom went silent. Even Daniel seemed to realize the magnitude of that moment. Rachel closed her argument with power and clarity. "This wasn't a marriage built on trust. This was a business plan. My client didn't just sign a prenup. She signed away her future based on a lie." The judge recessed for deliberation, and Rachel and Sarah left the courtroom for the day. The hallway outside was buzzing with press, but they pushed past quietly, choosing reflection over spectacle. Back in the hotel that night, Sarah sat on the balcony, overwhelmed but clear-headed. "I didn't know how strong I was," she whispered. Rachel joined her. "You never had to be," Rachel replied. "But now, the world knows." Tomorrow, the verdict would come. But tonight, Sarah had already reclaimed something more important than money, her dignity and her truth. The case was no longer just about what she had signed. It was about what had been stolen from her and what she was finally taking back. The courtroom was packed when the judge re-entered the room to deliver the verdict. Sarah sat beside Rachel, her heart pounding like a drum. Daniel, flanked by his attorneys, looked pale, his fingers nervously tapping the table. The judge began, his voice calm but firm. This case presented the court with more than a dispute over a prenuptial agreement. It uncovered a pattern of deceit, financial manipulation, and an intentional effort to render that agreement unjust. While prenuptial agreements are legally binding, they must be entered into in good faith. In this case, the evidence has shown that was not the case. The judge paused, glancing at both parties. The court hereby invalidates the prenuptial agreement. Furthermore, the court finds that the concealed assets are subject to equitable division. Sarah gasped, quietly, almost in disbelief. Daniel dropped his gaze to the floor. The legal war was over, but for Sarah, the real victory wasn't just the ruling. It was standing up to a lie that had shaped the last decade of her life. In the following weeks, a full audit of Daniel's finances was ordered. A forensic team uncovered even more hidden accounts and investments. What had started as a marital dispute evolved into a full-scale investigation. Meanwhile, Rachel was celebrated not just as a brilliant attorney, but as an advocate for women's rights in financial matters. She was invited to speak at legal forums, law schools, and women's empowerment conferences. Sarah, once quiet and private, began sharing her story on panels and podcasts, helping other women understand the importance of financial literacy and legal awareness in relationships. As Sarah stood in front of a crowd at one of those events, she said, "I never thought I'd be telling my story like this. But if it helps even one woman recognize the red flags, then it's worth it." Her strength became a source of inspiration. She launched a foundation that supported women in divorce battles, especially those facing financial abuse. And Rachel became one of its lead advisors. Daniel, on the other hand, faced scrutiny not only from the IRS, but from shareholders in his company. His image as a financial genius was tainted, and he quietly stepped down from the board. The empire he had so carefully built on half-truths and manipulation began to fracture. In the end, Sarah didn't just win a legal battle, she reclaimed her power, her future, and her voice. And as the sun set on the day of the final hearing, she walked out of the courthouse not as someone who had been defeated, but as someone who had risen. This story reminds us that the truth always finds its way through, no matter how deeply it's buried. If you found this story powerful, don't forget to subscribe to the Verdict Diaries. Every day, we bring you real stories of justice, betrayal, and redemption. Until next time, stay strong, stay informed, and remember, the truth always wins.